Again, my name is Trey Abney. I'm a partner in the Abney Tauchen group. My business partner, Leah Tauchen, and I have several clients, including NAOP, which is commercial real estate. We handle stuff for them in Northern Nevada. We've got some health insurance clients that we handle stuff legislatively and all the time in between. And we have some addiction recovery facilities and folks that we do work for. We've done work for American Chemistry Council and others. So just to give you an idea of kind of my background and why I'm here today and why I would know anything about the legislative process. I think this was my 7th or 8th legislative session that we just went through. I spent 10 years at the Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce as well. So have way too many years and way too many stories about the state legislature. So glad to be here today, and I'll let Lindsay introduce herself, and then I'll kick it off when she's done.
Thank you, Trey. Everyone, I'm Lindsey Knox. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs over at McDonald, Carano. I've been here a total of almost 15 years. My first session was back in 2009. So I've been doing this for quite a while. We represent home builders, developers, a lot of healthcare, a lot of physicians, REMSA, skilled nursing facilities, the Raiders, Microsoft, and quite a few other clients, all business related, very similar to Trey and Leah. We have a team of 7. 5 of us are up in the north and 2 down in Vegas. And we covered local and state on both ends, and also do quite a bit of local government with the city of Reno. So that is my background, and I will get this going, make sure everybody can see this, and let Trey get going.
I just want the record to reflect that I'm a big Chiefs fan, and the fact that I asked Lindsay to partner with me today, even though she represents the Raiders, just to show what a nice guy I am. All right.
That I'm a Raiders fan.
All right, let's, well, as we move to this first slide, I want to just get a couple things out of the way. Let me tell you what we're not going to do today. We're not going to bore you with AB 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 and all the whereases, and this bill did this, and this is, we're not going to get into the weeds of specific bills. There were, I don't know, Lindsay, 1,000, 1,200 of them that were introduced, 700 to 800 of them were passed. So certainly not of interest to this group, but what we will do today is just kind of give you a feel, a flavor for kind of the environment, the background, and kind of how we as lobbyists, non-legislators, kind of dealt with and handled the session. So just to try, we'll try not to bore you too much. And then before I kind of dig into this, please, I want this to be a casual conversation. Please interrupt at any time, whether it's verbally or if you want to pop up in the chat. If we're saying something and you want to ask a question or disagree or argue or have comments on it, please do so, and happy to address any issues or any questions as we go along. So with that, I think we want to set kind of the stage as we're moving into the legislative session, which of course began in February and went for 120 days till the end of May 31st actually. But last fall, kind of what we were looking at and kind of the promises, and we'll put promise in quotes, that we were given. And it's no surprise to this group that the last year has been kind of a mess for the legislature, for the state budget, for local government budgets. We had 2 special sessions of the legislature last summer. And basically the goal of both of those was really to cut the hell out of the state budget. Our revenue was dropping like a rock. Our biggest industry, people weren't traveling anymore. So no tourists were not coming here. And as you can imagine, that severely impacted the state budget. We got up to 30% unemployment at one point in this state, mostly due, again, to that workforce in Southern Nevada that were not working at casinos. And you had our casinos closed for, what was it, 2 months or so, which is unheard of in the history of the state. So, besides the budget, they made some election changes, so we all got mailed our ballots. So a lot of stuff happening last summer leading up into this. And so after they did all that, as we're moving into fall of 2020, legislative leadership in the conversations that Lindsay and I and other lobbyists had with them, we were told, look, guys, this is going to be a fiscal session. It's an all hands on deck to figure out how to stop the bleeding, patch whatever band-aids and holes that we can do, because we're in big trouble with our state budget. We are not going to, quote, we are not going to have time to tackle big policy discussions and big policy issues. It's going to be budget, COVID. How are we going to get out of this mess and come out of this session with some semblance of a state left and enough funding for education and healthcare and all the priorities? And so, again, that's the conversation leading into that to this session, last fall. Lindsay, do you want to add any color to that before we move on?
Yeah, I would add that it was interesting because you had both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, actually having different viewpoints on what session would look like. Senate wanted to have kind of a more robust session to tackle some of the policy discussions. Nothing as massive as what we saw, but they wanted those policy discussions. And then Speaker Jason Frierson, he wanted exactly what Trey said. He wanted to have a budget session and, trying to stop the bleeding. Again, when you look at what we had to do last year in those specials, it impacted, DETR for unemployment. It also impacted healthcare. Who was fighting this issue in this pandemic? They were getting cuts to try and stop that bleeding. So it was a very unique situation. I think one that none of them want to relive. But at the end of the day, promises were majorly broken and the trust does not exist right now.
All right, well, she's a little more blunt than I was about it, but I appreciate that. Lindsay, are we ready for the next?
Yep.
Next slide? Go ahead.
So, as I mentioned, the Senate and the Assembly currently right now are Democratic led, as well as the governor's mansion and the rest of our constitutional officers, except for our Secretary of State. So Attorney General, Treasurer, Controller, that's all, Democratic controlled. So if you'll see, I put a graph up just kind of so everybody could get a sense of who Trey and I deal with on a daily basis down in Carson City. And there's 16 freshmen in 2 appointments and 6 new committee chairs. So when we are in a normal session, when we're in front of these people, it's already difficult to get the necessary time to educate them on our clients' issues. You add a pandemic where nobody meets in person and you can't get into the building, it adds a whole new level of stress and inability to do our jobs. By them keeping us out of the building, it was so difficult to get meetings with people. This is how we did all of our meetings. If we could even get them, we relied on text, phone calls. Half the time they wouldn't even respond. So the transparency and the working together to help Nevada really just didn't exist going into the beginning of session. And then when it came to testifying and getting engaged in these bills, normally we'll go up to the dais, we will testify, legislators can interact with us, ask us questions, make comments. That didn't exist. If you were opposing a bill, which unfortunately we do a lot of because we represent business, we got 2 minutes. Legislators couldn't interact with us. There was no questions. So the dialogue didn't exist in making a lot of these policies. Anything to add, Trey?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. When you read about what's going on in session in the RGJ or Nevada Independent, or you see on the evening news, a lot of times it's, well, the Assembly took a vote today on maybe 1, 2, 3, and the vote was this, and this was the issue, or the Senate did this. And really what you're seeing there is the end of a long process. That is not really where the work, quote unquote, of the legislature is done. The work involves not only pre-session conversations before they ever get down there, but all of the meetings that Lindsay talked about, all of the hallway conversations, all of the committee hearings, et cetera, before they ever take a vote. And so when we can't talk to folks in a direct way, it made it very difficult. We put on there, lobbyists are not allowed in the lobby, right? Lobbyists, the word lobbyist came from, those folks that gathered in the hotel across from the White House to talk to the president and administration officials way back in the day. And so that, that's the history of that term. When we're not allowed to go into the building, we're really at the whim of, the front desk people, the attachés, they call them, of each legislator, and calling and saying, hey, can we get, a couple minutes to talk about issue X? Obviously, Lindsay and I and others, we were able to text legislators and try to call them directly. But let's just say it is a lot easier for them to ignore us when we're not standing out in the hallway, when we're not grabbing them as they're walking to the floor. It's hard, I guess, for them to walk around us, but that's how we were able to communicate. And I don't want to glorify lobbyists, and lobbyists get a bad name, and there's a decent amount of them that certainly deserve it. But when you have 63 citizen legislators, farmers and lawyers and teachers and firefighters and retirees, they don't know everything. Nobody does. And so if you're talking to a farmer and maybe you're talking about a banking issue or a health insurance issue, they really rely on those kind of subject matter experts and industry experts to tell you kind of what the deal is. You can read the bill, which is kind of the two-dimensional look, but then the three-dimensional look is really talking to folks around that issue. And we really didn't get to do that. Besides the fact, even just knowing who is in a committee room, walking in and seeing who is sitting there in the audience, who's watching, who's listening, even facial expressions, or you can sit there and tell if somebody in there is texting one of the people up on the dais, one of the legislators. We didn't get any of that. And that tells you a lot. That tells you, all right, why is that lobbyist in here? Who are his clients, his or her clients, and who do they represent? Why would they be interested in bill X? And when we're all on Zoom like this in a committee hearing where we're only seeing the committee members on screen, at least here, Dave, we can see everybody in attendance at this meeting and know who's here, but we couldn't even see that. We could only see the legislators. And so it was very difficult to kind of know who was listening. And then, if we were able to get a phone call in or a Zoom meeting in with an individual legislator in their office, I don't know if it happened to me, but it happened to some of my colleagues where we would be talking to a legislator, but we don't know who else is in the office with them. It may have been the proponents of the bill that we're there dumping all over on the screen right now. And so it's very difficult to have kind of those personal conversations. And I think I'll just end with this. And I mentioned the 2-minute testimony over the phone. Historically and usually, you have Bill AB 123, you have the proponents of that bill. It could be a legislator, or a legislator would turn it over to whoever group is working on that bill. They would go through their presentation of what the bill does and why it's so awesome and why we need it. And then, you'd have, all right, everybody in support of AB 123, line up and you go up to the microphone and you do your thing. And now there's, sometimes depending on the committee, they'll limit you to 2 or 3 minutes. But a lot of times they wouldn't, if it was a good, robust discussion. And then they'd go, everybody opposed, line up, do your thing, and then everybody neutral, do your thing. Well, we moved to a phone call system where you're dialing in over the phone, not Zooming like we are now, usually, but just dialing in. And you would have 2 minutes. And then there would be in a lot of committees, especially on the Senate side, I'll dump on them for a minute, there would be no cross examination, I guess, or any questions. And so you could have the bill proponents who presented the bill, they could talk for half an hour. Then you may have 20 to 30 minutes of support calling in. And then if this really affected an industry, but there were only 2 people on the phone from that industry in opposition, 4 minutes. So, what is that? Almost an hour of 50 minutes of support and maybe 4 minutes of opposition. But that opposition could be really important and probably deserves more than 2 minutes per person or 4 minutes total. And again, there were several committee chairs that wouldn't let committee members ask questions of people on the phone. And so you do your 2 minutes and you're up and you were gone and never to be heard from again. And usually Lindsay and I, we could text, Senator Settlemeyer and say, hey, can you make sure to ask this? And they weren't able to do that. It certainly makes the committee more efficient, but it's certainly not more transparent or fair when you can't get your whole story out. Now, if you're nervous about testifying and you go in there, there's several, and you're going to get grilled, it was kind of nice because you could do your 2 minutes and get off the phone and not have to go through the gauntlet, if you will. But it was a very difficult, and when you're talking about making public policy, to really cut off a conversation and debate like that, I think was one of the biggest travesties of this session. Lindsay, I know I went long. I don't know if you have anything to add before we move on, but.
You did go long, but that's okay. But one thing that I will add to that is we had to be creative. And my clients, something we had done in 19 that we chose to move over into this session was using social media and was using campaigns and utilizing their constituents to engage with them, to tell them why a bill was so damaging to them. We would geofence the building, and we would push out media to legislators. And we would go down to Carson and we'd make sure that it was working. As soon as you got within a couple feet of the building, it is popping up. It is telling you why. We were doing Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, emails, you name it, we were doing it all. Now, very expensive, but it worked. And so again, trying to be creative to make sure that our educating of legislators didn't fall flat. Did it work on all bills? No. But on the 2 big bills that our home builders were working on, it was very successful. And it is something we will continue to do. And we are telling other clients, you need to invest. This is the way that it's going to shift towards, and this is how you get their attention.
So Dave just asked if the legislature kept the building closed longer than necessary. In my opinion, absolutely. In my opinion, it should have never been closed in the first place. When I could go every weekend to Home Depot or the grocery store or wherever and do what I needed to do, mask or otherwise, whatever the rules were, then absolutely we should be able to go to the people's house, the seat of Nevada's government, when we're talking about bills and issues that affect the future of the state and people's everyday lives. Absolutely, that building should have been open with whatever kind of rules we needed to make. So I thought it was awful, Dave, that they kept it closed. Again, I'm just speaking for me. We could have worn masks in there. When they did open, to your point, it opened in mid-April. So it started in February. Session started in February. It didn't open until mid-April, which, by the way, has passed some bill deadlines. And not to go into those weeds, but there's deadlines. You have to get a bill through your first committee, and then through the first house, and then et cetera, to make sure things keep moving. And then when they did reopen, you had to either you had to test or prove your vaccination status, et cetera, and there'd be like 2 or 3 chairs in the audience at the committee hearing, so it was hard to do that. And legislators, most 2/3 of legislators from Clark County, right? Most of them every Thursday night or Friday are flying to Las Vegas and flying back up on Monday morning on crowded Southwest planes, but then telling us that we couldn't go in there and talk to them. So I'll get off my soapbox, Dave, but yeah, I don't think it should have ever been completely closed in the first place. Lindsay, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I completely agree. I think they could have opened it end of March, beginning of April. And on top of that, not all of us could get in the building. You had to get like an entry ticket to be able to get in, and legislators only had one. And so you were going to all your friends that were legislators saying, I need to get into the building, I need to talk to this person. But again, you have to then go through the whole thing of making sure you get your pass. And then if you haven't got vaccinated, which by that time, not many people outside of seniors, essential workers had the ability to get the vaccine. We were lucky in law firms. We were up at the front for some very, very strange, horrible reason. We got to get vaccinated really early.
Lawyers are critical, so I'm glad you guys jumped the line.
Yeah, exactly. I can thank some friends of ours in a different organization for why we got to jump. But so my office was vaccinated very early, and we were able to get into the building with no problems. when we could get a pass. But I do agree that it could have been opened earlier. We could have been more efficient, and they kept it closed to limit the input, in my personal opinion.
Agreed. All right. I think, Lindsay, we're ready to move
Yep.
on.
There you go.
This one's mine, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm glad you're keeping me on track. So, we mentioned the promises that were made prior to session. It was going to be a COVID session, budget. Don't worry, guys, we will not have time to talk about major policy issues. Well, lo and behold, this whole time, even starting in February when they opened up, there were some major policy discussions that happened and some major bills that passed. Some failed, but a lot passed. I'm not going to go into each of these individually, and Lindsay can certainly pop in on anything she wants to add more about. But, we put public option at the top, and I think that's, Lindsay and I both have healthcare clients and clients in the healthcare supply chain. It's called a public option, but this was SB 420, a bill that would require insurance companies who bid on the state Medicaid contract to also bid and make a proposal to run a quote public option health insurance plan that eventually would be 15% cheaper than other insurance plans offered in the state. There's no solutions on how to make it. Wouldn't make healthcare cheaper. It just the health insurance policies would be cheaper. So however that magic voodoo would work, this was something that wasn't introduced, Lindsay, until end of April, early May, with maybe 40 days left to go when it actually was introduced. Several of my clients weren't even talked about it. Luckily we heard from others who were invited to a very small meeting. And so look, I'm not going to sit here and dump on the public option. There may be people here that love that bill, but the 2 points: one, this was a major public policy discussion in a session that we were told it wasn't going to happen in, and two, this was a bill that was introduced with maybe a month left in the session, and introduced, heard, and passed very quickly with almost zero opportunities for us to amend it. So I'll get off of that. A big comprehensive energy bill, certainly not necessarily as controversial as the public option. NV Energy was certainly behind this. And again, a lot of conversations have been going on over the interim and throughout the session, but this was a big bill that deals with the future of this state and electrification and making sure that we're running power lines all across the state to help North and South. Again, didn't get introduced. I think Lindsay was even after the public option bill. It was maybe a couple of weeks left in the session when they dropped this thing and then debated it. Mining tax bill, that made a lot of press. That was something that we knew would eventually come. It was a deal mining cut with leadership. Mining made that deal because they had a gun to their head. Legislative leadership said, if you don't agree to a tax package, we're going to put 2 or 3 ballot initiatives on that will raise your tax through a vote of the people. And so mining decided, well, they better, instead of spending all that money and time fighting a worse proposal, they got in bed with leadership and came up with a deal that's going to send something like, I want to say 500 million to education. 200 to 300 of that's new revenue. The rest of it's kind of moving from existing mining revenue sources and moving it all to education. Election reform bills, it's basically a continuation of what they did in the special sessions, where we're all going to get mailed ballots, whether you want them to or not, extending the time where they can be returned and counted, allowing what some people call vote harvesting, but others call just groups being able to collect ballots on behalf of other people. Don't need to get too in the weeds on that, but certainly a very controversial proposal when you're talking about election security and election fraud and whether there was fraud or not. And, that kind of tied into a lot of national politics too. Ghost guns, those companies that make guns that don't have serial numbers on them, or people that make their own guns, which people have been doing since before this country was this country. Those were outlawed, and there was a bill, this one failed, but that would have allowed covered premises like casinos to use police force as kind of their own security force in enforcing people who are carrying guns on property or like concealed carry. That one failed for a variety of reasons. But again, major issues on, and for those of you that are not aware, there's certainly a segment of Nevadans that are very concerned about gun bills and gun rights. So you can imagine what this did as they started talking about it. Innovation zones, I'm sure most of you heard about. The blockchains company pushed this, wanting to form their own city of the future, carved out of Story County, form their own government. It would not be a part of Story County anymore, and they would have different regulations. And again, basically a company town forming their own government, something that the governor actually put in his State of the State address. A lot of back and forth on this one. They bargained this down to a kind of a legislative committee study, and they'll start meeting to look at this. But again, a major, something that's never been done before, and a major change to Nevada government and how it works. Right to return back to your job. This bill was very broad ranging when it was introduced. At the end of the day, it applies to tourism entities like hotel casinos. I think it applies to airports and those folks as well. But basically says, hey, if you laid somebody off during the pandemic, those people have a right to come back at their same level, same pay, same benefits, seniority, et cetera. Whether you want them to come back or not, or whether if you're hiring, there was a kind of a matrix and a formula for hiring these folks back. In my personal opinion, comes dangerously close to having a right to a specific job, which certainly the business community was concerned about. The only other thing I'll add on here that we did not put was consumption lounges. Marijuana consumption lounges were a big conversation. I'm sure several of you are aware that we now have legal marijuana dispensaries in this state. This is the next step to actually having a legal place for people, i.e. tourists, to actually consume the products from these dispensaries. One of the issues that our tourism folks and gaming folks have been concerned about is tourists can fly here, buy marijuana and cannabis at our dispensaries, but legally they can't use them in hotel rooms. They can't walk down the street with them, although I smell it everywhere I walk now, but a different story. And so they can only legally consume it in houses. So unless you had an Airbnb when you came to Las Vegas or Reno, that's the only place you could do it. So they did pass that, and there's a whole formula in place for how many of those and who they can be attached to and who they can't. But I'll shut up on all that. But just to say, there were a ton of major policy decisions and discussions that happened in this COVID-only, budget-only session. Lindsay, do you have anything on that?
What I would add is that a few of these bills, public option, right to work, right to return, they came from a national agenda. This is something new that's coming into this state, is you have a lot of national attention on Nevada, and especially our shift in the color of our state. And so we see a lot of money being poured into this state and a lot of ideas coming from this national agenda of how things are polling. I'm sure all of you saw that death penalty, it failed. And the reason it failed is because it's not doing well on a national poll. People don't, that's not an issue for people right now. Public option is. And so you saw this just enormous amount of money get poured into this state. Friends of ours were being, had side contracts to make sure this bill passed. And initially we all thought it was going to die. We had promises it was going to die. And then it just took off. And we had no control, regardless of, our testimony on those bills. So that is something that happened. It's going to continue to happen. And it puts us in a corner on how we approach these bills and the deals that we make.
Good call on the death penalty. I don't know why we didn't put that on there. That was obviously a big one. And that one was interesting because the assembly passed it. And then after they passed it, the governor's like, I don't know about that. And then the Senate just never took it up. And so the assembly kind of got hung out to dry on that vote when the governor and the Senate, again, all controlled by Democrats in this case, on that issue. So very interesting. All right, Linz, I think the next one,
Still yours. Have fun talking about money.
Yeah, and I'm not, I'm a political science major, so you don't want me anywhere near a spreadsheet of any kind. But just to briefly touch on kind of what we looked at total, and again, very briefly on this, we came out with a $9 billion budget. Now that includes money from the feds, money from fees that businesses and others pay, and then sales and taxes and property, all the stuff that goes in to government funding. It totals about $9 billion for the state for the next 2 years. The next biennium, we budget on 2-year cycles. $2.7 billion in federal stimulus dollars to the state, and then not even counting the local government school districts and higher education that are going to get millions more from all the various sources of funding from the stimulus packages, both from under the Trump administration and then under the Biden administration. And then I mentioned the mining tax with $200 million in new taxes and redirected taxes education. We only want to talk about this because, frankly, given our state budget issues and given the concerns that people had during the special session, when again they were cutting so much out of it, Lindsay, I think we probably came out, because of the pandemic and because of the stimulus dollars, we probably came out at the end of the day spending more over these next 2 years than we would have if we had never had a pandemic. And so we went from, they talk about feast to famine, or famine to feast, I guess. We thought, it was going to be devastating. We weren't going to be able to fund anything, to now, I just read a story today about the state and local governments still not spending most of their money and having more than they know what to do with. Some city council somewhere in some state voted to give themselves raises. With this money. So just stuff like that. So the pandemic was certainly awful for our economy, and will continue to probably have some bumps, especially for our small business folks and restaurants and retailers. But we have spent so much money, again, more money than we would have had if we had never had a pandemic bump into our economy. So anyway, Lindsay, I don't know if you have anything to add on any of the budget stuff, but
I would add that was not what we expected. Our economic forum expected us to have a hole, and for these federal dollars to really help keep us out of that. And when they came in May and they looked at the new numbers, we were all blown away with, now what is the state going to do with all these additional funds? But there's a huge key factor the legislature has to remember. They can't overspend, because if they overspend on not one-shot items, we have to make that up in 2023 for that next biennium budget. So they have to be very cautious with how they spend, making sure that they don't have to then raise taxes, which I'm sure will be a discussion in 2023, but we don't want to have to make it a discussion and force additional taxes. So that's going to be something that they really have to look at. They have to be very cognizant about, is not overspending.
that is a very good point. The problem is when you start new programs with one-shot federal dollars, and then in 2023, those programs, you're going to have legislators like, well, we can't end them now. We've got X amount of people depending on this. And so now we'll have to find state dollars to do this. Lindsay, I'm going to throw this one at you since you brought it up, but Rich is asking what can be done about one party's national agenda being put forth as part of Nevada's legislative process.
Vote better? Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm a true believer in balanced government. I truly am. And I think that in this state especially, what we need to do is we need to have open primaries. We have gone so far, and now we have this massive independent or nonpartisan voting bloc, but they don't get to vote in the primary election for party races. So you are taking out that moderate voice and leaving it on both sides of the far left and far right spectrum, that we're missing the common sense. And that's what needs to really change, that's what we're lacking, is common sense. So to get these national agendas out of our state, that's what we need to focus on. And we need to bring in, the open primaries and do it in a way that works for our state. And because there's different ways to do it. And I think that that's how we can manage and turn to a more purple, which then creates more balance and more common sense.
A couple things. I completely agree with Lindsay. When we have these closed primaries, nobody's talking to the bell curve. The normal's in the middle, right? Everybody's talking to the extreme ends. And you even have some cases, and it's happened on both parties, where Assembly District A, let's say only 3 Democrats file, no Republicans, nobody else. And let's say it's a Democrat district. So we know the Democrat's going to win that general election. But since it was only Democrats that filed, only registered Democrats can vote in that primary for that representative. That person in June wins the primary and gets that seat, and is now the assembly person for that seat without the Republicans or the independents in that district. And if you add Republicans and independents together, for example, they may actually be more than the number of Democrats in that district. They had no say in who their assembly person was. And that, again, I'm picking on Democrats there. It has happened in Republican districts as well. So I completely agree with Lindsay on that piece. The second, I would just add that while we're talking about the 2021 session, and obviously we're talking about like national Democrats and national agenda, let's be very clear that Republicans, if they were in charge, just like they were in 2015, you would see a lot of national issues trickle in this, whether it's immigration or English as an official language. But my point is, both parties do this. When they get in charge, you have some national groups and national agendas that flow down into bills.
Yes,
So,
this is not a one-party issue. This is a both extreme party issue.
Agreed.
So I am going to take over from here, and that is kind of what we're looking into after the 2021 session. We will have a special session this fall, and that is to look at redistricting. We did not get our census data in enough time to do it during session, so now we are stuck dealing with it in the fall. And on top of that, they have actually moved the filing date for potential candidates to February. So we're going to leave a very, very short window for people to know what district they're in and to decide to file and run for office. So in the special session for redistricting, they will be redrawing the 4 congressional seats, all of the legislative seats, and then our county commission will follow more of the census because they are party seats. And then the city of Reno is currently working on theirs. I think that's part of their discussion down at City Hall today. I know they started that process about a month ago, looking at those lines. But in the city of Reno, they have a large seat. That's going away. So now they have to carve in a 6th district, which both Devin Reese, who holds the at-large seat, and Neoma Jordan, who holds Ward 5, both live in the same neighborhood. So it's going to be very interesting to see how those lines are redrawn to make sure that Devin remains and Neoma can carry out her term. So that will be very interesting. We do not have a part in that. Our opinions don't matter. We believe that Senate District 16, which is held by Senator Ben Kekeffer, he is termed out. They think that's going to the South. There will be limited Republican engagement in this. So we will see more seats go to Vegas, more seats become 1. So 2 Senate districts could encompass more land. So that's going to be very problematic and very concerning as we move into the next 10 years.
Lindsay, I would just add on to that. 10 years ago, we had a Republican governor, Brian Sandoval, and a Democratic legislature. And so it ended up, they couldn't all agree, and they sent it to the courts to draw the line. So the lines we have now that we're living under right now and have for the past decade were actually drawn by the courts. This time, to Lindsay's point, we have a Democrat governor, Democrat Assembly, and Democrat Senate. So it probably won't be as difficult and have all the rigmarole that we had 10 years ago. And even though, to Lindsay's point about us losing seats to the South, even though we're certainly growing at a rapid clip in Northern Nevada, there's 63 seats. The Constitution, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, gives us 75 total that we would be allowed to have. There have been efforts over the past, especially when Bill Raggio was still with us and Senate Minority Leader or Majority Leader. There have been efforts in the past to kind of increase the number of seats in the legislature in order to kind of keep the North whole, if you will. Certainly, there is no appetite from Clark County legislators and from Democrats to do that. And so that's why with a fixed number of seats at 63 right now, you will see more seats move to Las Vegas. And our rurals, we've already got such huge rural assembly and Senate districts, and those will probably get bigger. But anyway, thanks, Lindsay. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're good. And then looking at the election. So there are 11 Senate seats on the ballot. Those will again look very different. And as of right now, there's 4 termed out, and there are some that aren't going to run for re-election. They may be running for other seats because they're midterm. So we're going to see a huge shakeup in the Senate and the Assembly. And in the Assembly, there's 3 termed out, but we have a lot of people not wanting to return. The environment that has been created, the fact that these are citizen legislators, they do not make any money, none. If they do not have a full-time job or really good retirement, they cannot depend on this to pay their bills. So, they are at the mercy of being able to survive and also stay sane. And so a lot of folks on both sides are just deciding to bow out, and they don't want to do this anymore. And quite frankly, we can't blame them. The environment has changed in such a negative manner. I think it stems a lot from the federal level and has trickled down, that some of our best legislators are like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this anymore. So then we're asked, Trey and I are asked, help us find good candidates. And that is, the position that both caucuses or all 4 caucuses are in right now. And they reach out to us, and they reach out to the Culinary Union and other organizations to help find those folks. And it is not easy to find people willing to kind of uproot their life to do this. So again, we are going to see a lot of shakeup in the way that our legislature looks. And then on top of that, all of our constitutional offices are up and termed out. You have Barbara Sagaski, the lone Republican. She is termed out. And then everybody else has 1 more term. So we will see who files against those folks. And I don't see many of them losing, if I have to be honest.
I think you're right. At this point, a lot of people ask for, when we're talking about these issues with folks, and they ask for what our crystal ball looks like. Definitely fuzzy. Nevada is certainly a purple state, getting purpler and purpler, probably toward the blue direction. Washoe County is certainly right on the cusp. I mean, we're almost evenly split and right on the cusp of being blue. You combine that with Clark County, which is deeply blue. We're a different state than we have been historically. 2022 being the midterm of a Democratic president. Usually the midterm of any president is good for the opposing party. So history would tell you that Republicans nationwide, at least, should have a decent shot of making some gains in this election, but I'm not convinced that trickles down to Nevada. You do have both of our state parties are kind of in disarray right now, so that makes it interesting. Certainly it's hard to beat an incumbent. Does Governor Sisolak get punished by all the pandemic stuff and his responses to it and the business shutdowns and masks and all that? Maybe, although between now and November 2022 is a lifetime in politics. So I'm not convinced, unless something, who knows what happens in the next year and a half, but I would give him a leg up. And of course it matters who the people are that are running. So who is Governor Sisolak's opponent going to be? Is it going to be Sheriff Joe Lombardo from Clark County, who's kind of the Sandoval moderate lane in the Republican Party right now, kind of the establishment choice. Is it going to be Reno attorney Joey Gilbert, who's been making a lot of noises, and in a Republican primary, certainly wouldn't sell Mr. Gilbert short. Just as an aside, in the primary, 50% statewide of the Republican vote is outside of Clark County, 50%. So the rurals and the red counties in this state have a lot of say in what Republican comes out of a statewide race in June of the election year. So just be thoughtful about that. Like Lindsay, I would give all of our incumbents a leg up, I think, moving into next year. We're going to have all mail-in ballots. We still don't know kind of the results of that. And finally, I guess I would just say we have a lot of nonpartisans and independents that are registered now. A decent portion of that has to do with DMV. You're automatically now registered at the DMV, and most people just don't pick a party when that happens. And so they end up on the rolls as independents. But we don't know yet what those independents, what they look like, which side they lean to, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. So I'm hesitant to give any kind of guesses a year and a half out on what the election looks like. Lindsay, I don't know if you have anything on that.
One thing that I would add that I forgot to mention when we were talking about redistricting is that because nonpartisan is the second largest party in the state, how do you include those in redrawing these lines? And I have asked every legislator, and nobody has an answer other than looking at the folks that have previously voted and looking at what party they are, and then trying to redraw the lines from there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this is done. I think it is going to be very uneven, with these folks, because most of the people I know, they've all switched. They're all switching to nonpartisan, and I'm like, please stay a party. I don't care what party you are, just stay a party until we have open primaries, and then we can all switch and be happy. But that is going to be, I think, very key to the way that our lines are redrawn, is to be able to answer that question. And I'm still waiting very patiently for my answer.
I'm glad you pointed that out. For those of you that are still registered as a partisan, Democrat, Republican, be thoughtful about changing your registration to independent. And again, we completely understand why. It makes a ton of sense to me. But just know that when you do that, you are taking yourself out of the June primary election. And that, in most districts, that is where the election is decided. So if you live in a heavily Republican neighborhood or heavily Democratic neighborhood, just know that in the primaries is where most of those races will be decided. So just be thoughtful about that. Skip, what will it take to have open primaries? It would take a change, and it would take a bill in the legislature and signed by the governor to do that. And when you have parties, whatever party running the legislature, they are pretty loath to open up their process like that. Because and look to play the other side of the coin for a minute. If you are an active registered Democrat and you want Democrats elected, you probably look askance at having an open primary and allowing anybody, including Republicans, to come in there and jam up who you think you want to be. Because there would be a lot of games played with Republicans, and we'll just use this as an example, with Republicans wanting to come over to a Democratic primary and just pick the most loony, left-wing, unelectable person in order to get their guy elected. And people switch back. I knew people that switched parties so they could vote for Bill Raggio over Sharon Angle, for example. So there are things. So it's not without its problems. It's just a question of whether we believe that the state should be endorsing the process of basically private clubs, running our election. But I don't know if I answered your question, Skip, but I mean, I don't know if it will ever happen, but that's what it would take. It'd just be a change in law.
Senator Keffer carried an open primary bill, and it didn't even get a hearing. So it has started, the conversation is starting. And I think it started a few years ago, but I think we're going to see it more because, again, with the nonpartisan numbers the way that they are, I think there's going to be a huge push from those folks to have a voice. And how are you going to deny your constituents voices? So it may be a while, but eventually I'm sure it will happen.
And Diana, I mean, that's a great question. It would take all of us sitting down with people from both parties, and it's going to take people from both parties, Democrats and Republican leadership, sit down and say, all right, we want to have open primary. I mean, it literally takes that. I wish I had the silver bullet for you and how we can make these laws better. Laws are passed by legislators who have their own partisan inclinations and their own ideological thing, just like every other law they pass.
Trey, can you read me the question? My bar's over the presentation, so I didn't want to drop it down.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Diana's just asking, closed primaries, she says, is why she switched from independent to a party. And she's asking, how can we help make our state's voting laws better so it is more balanced? You have anything more on that?
A miracle? No. I think Trey's right. I think that it's going to take the parties coming back to the middle to be able to have those conversations when they are so on the fringes on both sides. It's hard for them to sit in a room together and have a decent dialogue. So that really that ship has to come to the middle again for us to have an open dialogue. Or crazy thing, you have a speaker like Jason Frierson in the assembly, and then you get a moderate Republican in the Senate, and the Republicans take the Senate, and they both see this as an opportunity. It both falls on both their shoulders, and they're willing to have that conversation and that fight.
Yeah, and it might help if both of them are term limited, so they're not coming back again and face the wrath of the voters.
Jason's almost term limited.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the key, right? I mean, that's why you see second term governors propose tax increases, and not first termers. And they're usually Republican governors, by the way, but as an aside. Lindsay, I think, is that
we have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just a few other things and kind of what we can expect going into the 2023. We have seen such impacts what term limits have done to our state. The institutional knowledge that we lose is instrumental every session. We are losing Senator Ben Kekeffer and Assemblywoman Maggie Carlton. There are no two people in that building that know the budget better than those two people. Now they are on polar opposite sides of the way that they want the budget to look, but they know it. And the intricate details that go into creating a balanced budget and making sure that there's not a whole lot of harm, and that goes away. And so our responsibility, mine and Trey's, is again, we're educators in a sense, and now we get to go and do this all over again. And that's a problem when you lose that institutional knowledge. My first session, I got to see Bill Raggio and Randolph Townsend and Bernice Matthews and Maurice Washington, and talk about people working for the good of our state. And it's because they could be like, oh, remember what happened in 1996? Remember that hearing? They all knew it. And they had this open door and this camaraderie that they all respected one another. And term limits has impacted that for us. Now, mind you, there are some people that, yes, we want out of office, but I think there's more good people that we want to stay. So that is, again, something we are going to continue to see. We're going to see a huge, group of folks that we all respect leaving us before next session. There's potential shakeup in leadership now that we have the fringe kind of starting to infiltrate into our leadership. So we could have a more conservative and more liberal leadership in all of our caucuses. Again, not meeting in the middle. Like I mentioned, more power to the South, and then continuing a national agenda. That I don't see stopping until the tides change in elections for us. Anything, Trey?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Rich, politics shouldn't be a career. Amen. George Washington left after 2 terms. I think he probably set a good example for all politicians to follow. I personally definitely agree with that. But yeah, I mean, I think Lindsay covered this very well. The 2023 session and the building will look a lot different than the 2021 session did. And just because somebody's been there a long time and is smart and well-liked and moderate and can work with people and should be the leader of whatever caucus doesn't mean that they will be. So, and with that, Dave, I think we're done with our prepared. If anybody has any final questions or comments or commentary.
Take down our information too. If you ever want to talk, both of us are available always. So please, I'll leave this up for a second or a little more than a second. But there are people on this that can get a hold of both of us very quickly. So feel free if there's additional questions.
So Lindsay, I don't know if you can see it, but Diana says that it's good to hear that there are more good people that you want to stay, because generally we don't hear that. I'm not sure I agree with Lindsay on that. I'd have to think through that for a second, but yeah, thanks. Thanks, Diana. Anything else before we hand it back over to Skinny?
This is Mark Tolman. You had mentioned a few individuals for possible gubernatorial candidates to run against Governor Sisolak. How about at some of the other levels or other positions? Anybody on a local level that kind of is a who's who in the area that might be running for public office? I believe Christopher Dahir, Sparks City Council, I think, is he running for Attorney General?
He's running for Secretary of State, Chris Dare.
Secretary of State, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Cisco Aguilar, he's a former Reedite, Harry Reid staffer, so he's running for Secretary of State as well. And I believe that former Assemblywoman Ellen Spiegel out of Las Vegas also may throw her hat in on the Democrat side of Secretary of State. Cisco may keep her out of it, but that's, again, what I've heard.
Well, and that being said, Mark, folks like Chris Dare, when they're mid-term, he's in the middle of his Sparks City Council term, so they can run for another office like that. And if they lose, they can still serve out the rest of the current office they're in. All kinds. I mean, we saw that Jenny Breckus she's looking at running for mayor against Hillary Sheevey in 2 years. Not convinced that she can legally do that because she's already been on the ballot 3 times and would have served her full term by 2024. Certainly, Naomi Dorr on Regal City Council's up one more time. There's been talk of a couple different folks running for that, but it's a lot of rumor and innuendo now. Mark, county commission, I think you will see some legislators who won't run again that will look at local seats like county commission seats. So they usually don't go away. They usually pop up, somewhere else, after they've been the state or local government. So I don't know if we've answered your question. Lots of rumors, people talking, but.
Yeah. Any news with Ben and what he's going to do?
He is staying right where he is. 3 offices down from me is where he is staying.
Okay.
Ben's not, he is not going to run for anything. I think he served his time. He did it well. And now we talk internally every day about what our next steps are and what our team looks like.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. Well, you two were wonderful. I'm not sure how upbeat this all was, but it was certainly very illuminating. So thank you for the tremendous insights into what happened down there.
Dave, I will tell you, I try really hard to find something upbeat about what Trey and I do. It's hard. It really is. And that's why I try and add fun pictures to slides to not it be so horribly dark. But things are just unsettled right now. And I think that, again, once we can find a decent balance and really good candidates, I hope and pray that we see a change in the tide.